Welcome back to the Rahu-Ketu files. This is lecture 5, perspective 4, Ketu's avatar. So let's get right into it. This is the overview. We're going to cover these 7 sections. Entering the psycho-mythic field, which I'm really excited for. It's going to be a very interesting topic. Avataras and the Grahas as extensions of that. Shatpat Brahman. Shatpat Brahman is another very important text, and we're going to see a few shlokas from there. Then the legend of Matsya, I'm going to tell the story here. Symbols, motifs, and the psychoanalytic reading of Matsya. So this is going to be a very interesting one. Again, Manu Manas and the moon, the human path, and finally the archetypal function of Ketu. So let's get right into it. Entering the psycho-mythic field. So here's a quote. Myth is not something that happened. It is something that is always happening. Myth is not an ancient make-believe sort of a tale that is sort of primitive people creating folklore and stuff and imagining stuff just curated. It is something that is always happening. Where is it happening? How is it happening? What is the function of myth? So before we speak of karma, nodal activation, shadow work, and all of these fascinating psychoanalytic ideas, we must enter a different register of understanding, what I call the psycho-mythic field. This is the place where myth, psychology, and metaphysics interact, and Jyotish becomes the perfect ground for this interaction. It does so in such a sophisticated manner and it lands it so appropriately that I don't personally see how this can be done. It can be done in various ways, and it is being done in a lot of psychoanalysis and various fields and stuff. But Jyotish really does it really well. It is the perfect tool to land psychology, mythology, and metaphysics and make them interact in such a fuse them in such a profound way. It's so mind blowing. And we'll see how. So, where stories are not merely symbolic or religious stories, but structuring principles of experience, blueprints of how consciousness manifests, fragments, forgets, and seeks itself again. How profound is that? How profound a proposition is that? How unbelievable a proposition is that? Right? And Jyotish proposes that to us as a starting point. And as we practice Jyotish, we start realizing these things as to be actually be making sense. The Jyotish becomes a tool to experiment with these ideas and see for ourselves how this could be true. So, when I say psychomythic, I do not mean mythology as a historical archive of belief systems. I mean a way of seeing, a method through which we perceive the unconscious structures of this ongoing dream. The unconscious structures. So there's an actual function, a structure, and we can decode and unravel that structure and understand ourselves, understand the collective consciousness, the collective unconscious and its structures, and why society, individual, how they interact, and why they are the way they are. What is this story unfolding? The psychomythic approach of Jyotish allows us to understand how the collective unconscious scripts our journey through archetypal narratives. The psychomythic approach is a very important line of Jyotish allows us to understand how the collective unconscious, Maha Achetan, if you can call it, scripts, right? So it's sort of like sort of has a script to it. Our journey through archetypal narratives which are archetypal, that are always sort of true, no matter what whether you're modern, pre-modern, primitive, ancient, whichever time you want to go to, even in the future, after 3,000 years, 4,000 years, these still sort of hold true as long as there is a, a sort of a self-conscious being on earth. Toward how myth is a dream of the collective psyche, and how the psyche is not inside of us, but we are inside of psyche. So these are all mind-blowing propositions. Of course, I completely understand how this can even feel a bit abstract or ungrounding to you, but we'll build upon this. We'll see, and we'll go through this entire idea of psychomyth properly, more deeply. So avatars and grahas as extension of that with a capital T, is that which is unnameable, that which is beyond. So in chapter 2 of Brihad Parashara Hora Shastra, or more appropriately Parashara Hora, a profound truth is laid out, one that is often bypassed, but which forms the very metaphysical foundation of our lecture today. The sutra says, Avataranyane hya jasya paramatmanaha jivanam karma falado graharupi janardanaha. I'm just a student like you, so forgive me if I make mistakes while reading these sutras. I'm just practicing myself. I'm just a student sharing with another student. That's the only way I would want to be perceived. The many avatars of unborn beyond self, beyond that which is beyond the self. That, as Janardana, takes the form of the grahas to deliver the fruits of karma to jivas. The fruits are also not just sweet fruits, they're also bitter fruits. There are many flavors to these fruits. Jivas are all the living beings on earth, whether it's a cat, a dog, a human animal, or any other being. The many avatars, the many forms, the many descents of the unborn that is beyond self, Paramatmana, Atma that is Para Atma, that is beyond that which is even is. As Janardhan. Janardana is a very important word here. Takes the form of the grahas through the psychometaphysics of Jyotish, through these grahas, delivers the activity, sort of churns the ocean, sort of creates karma, gives fruits of karma, punishes in the fruits of karma, this punishment giving dynamic that we always discuss, that we all in Jyotish, that is part of the narrative. It's not a punishment, this is a wrong sort of understanding, but it is a way to understand. Janardana comes from Janan Ardhyati. Janana, people or beings. Jan, which we get the word Jan, people. Uh, People or beings, accusative plural of jana, meaning living beings, people or creatures. Ardhana, afflicting, chastising, correcting, destroying, disturbing, afflicting, moving, like creating a sort of distortion. From the root ardh, meaning to injure, strike, pain, afflict. The soul, the pure consciousness, is deluded in this dream, in the dream that is caused by the grahas. Is a very profound sort of proposition, almost mind blowing, right? It's so interesting. We're studying Kal, we're studying time. So, Janardhan literally means the one who afflicts or agitates beings, creatures, or people on earth. Not just people as human people, as all beings, all creatures on earth. It creates karma, it creates movement, and distorts the Nirolavastha, the sort of the unchanged state of consciousness is sort of changed and a lot happens within us. So the grahas, modulators of pure consciousness, are forms of that, of the supreme consciousness, Paramatman, not in metaphor, but in actual structure that Jyotish is proposing to us. The very instruments through which karma is distributed, through the subtle laws and structures of the psychometaphysics of this earthly dream. So one of the claims in Jyotish is that it is universal. It is universal only in the sense, as far as I know personally, earthly metaphysics. Beyond Earth, I don't know what's true or not true, but on Earth, this is how the Jyotish of Earth functions. Probably other grahas have their own astrology, own Jyotish, own metaphysics. Earthly Jyotish is the Jyotish that we are studying. Each graha is a subtle psycho-metaphysical principle, a force, an organizing vibration, a psycho-spiritual thing, for the lack of a better term, an agency of becoming, an agency of agitation, agency of perception, engaging with reality, cognition, out of which Rahu and Ketu, that we're studying through these Rahu-Ketu files, is part and parcel of that structure. So, the grahas are told in this particular sutra as extensions of that which is beyond time, of Paramatma. Then we get three verses, three sutras in the same chapter, which what the first one is Rahu-Avatāra Surasya Chandrasya Yadunayakah Narsimo Bhumi Putrasya Buddha Soma Sutrasya Cha. Then I'm pretty sure I'm making some mistakes here while reading them, but as I said, I'm just learning how to read these. Vamano Vibhudejasya Bhargavo Bhargavasya Cha Kurmo Bhaskara Putrasya Samhikeyasya Sukaraha. Then the next sutra is Ketor Meenavatarascha, which is the important one for this lecture. Ye chanye tepi khetajah paratmamshodhiko yeshu te sarva khechara vidah. So the third sutra, there's a term that comes here, Ketor Meenavatarascha. This is the one that is important for us for this particular lecture. I just put these sutras because a lot of the times we make these discussions in Jyotish and we don't know where it's coming from. We have never sort of seen the sutras. So for me personally, as a student, when I started studying Jyotish, when the sutras were presented to me and I could read them out with however many mistakes, it was always so fascinating that these were actually written down and coded thousands or hundreds of years ago that we still have with us for us to contemplate and think about together. So here's the translation, and this is one of the translations, and you can fix it, work on it. If you agree or disagree with certain words, certain translations, you definitely comment and we can have a dialogue. Always have a dialogue with the things that you disagree or agree with. Rama is the avatar of the sun. Krishna, the leader of the Yadu clan, is of the moon. Narsimha is of Mars. The word is not Mars, the word is uses Bhumi Putrasya, the Putra of Bhumi, not Earth. It's Bhumi. Bhu is a very important word in Bhulok. So we are using translations for us to be able to grasp these ideas, but if you only read through the Sanskrit itself, it has a lot of profundity, a lot of philosophy. Buddha, the awakened one, the ones whose dhi is awakened, is of Mercury, the son of the moon. So the word here is uses Soma Sutrasya, I think, which means the Sutta of Soma, Sutta of Soma, which is Mercury. Then Vamana, the one worshipped by the Devas, Vibhudejasya, a name of Jupiter, Vibhudejasya, the one Jupiter referring to the Jupiter is Vaman. Then Parshurama is of Venus, Bhargava. Kurma is of the son of the sun, which is Saturn. So Saturn's avatar is Kurma. Venus's avatar is Parshurama, which is so interesting. Uh, Vaman, Jupiter's avatar is Vaman, the dwarf, the short dwarf, the small one. Semikeya Varaha, which we'll do in the next lecture, which is so important. Simika is very important of the character to understand. Simika, so the is of Rahu. Then we see Matsya is the avatar of Ketu. This is very important for this lecture, and others too are born of the grahas. So this is very important. All avtaras are a form of sort of an expression of a graha, a dominant expression of the graha. The sutra tells us that everything else that you speak of, you and I as a expression, will also have dominant themes in a chart, and we'll sort of express that graha. That's what I mean by psycho-mythic field. So in those where the portion, amsha, of the Supreme Self is predominant, in the ones, in the jivas that the amsha of Paramatma is predominant, they are known as Khechara, celestial beings who move in space. So there's a lot of philosophy here, a lot of discussion, a lot of encoded sort of metaphysics here. It's so deep. There's probably like hundreds of lectures that could probably just be done on this. There's so much that I personally don't understand yet, and we need to discuss and have dialogues and research this stuff. But for us, what's important is not Sukara Semike. This is For us, what is important is Ketur mean avatarascha. Sukara Semikasya will be covered in the next lecture, which is uh, Varaha avatar is of Rahu. Ketur mean avatarascha. Matsya Avatar, mean avatar, Meena means also fish, is of Ketu. These are not ornamental mythologies, they're not for decorations, they're not for this beautiful itihasa or some sort of literature that we have from past. It's not about that. They are psychic operators, operations, ontological structures, avatars of experience arising within the field of unconscious, the study of the collective unconscious, to shape how life is lived, how karma is processed, and how the self forgets and remembers itself again. And that's why you see texts that were written, details about Rama, the Itihasa we study there, are still more than even more relevant. And you would think that in the modern, postmodern sort of the world of artificial intelligence and stuff, these stories will become less relevant. But they're becoming more relevant now. That's why they're telling us about something about the structure of the unconscious, something so profound. Each graha carries within it an impulse of an avatar. This is not merely personification or anthropomorphizing. This is not just humanizing or just personifying it, but a soteriological vibration. Soteriology is that which deals with salvation, freedom, liberation, a modality of intervention. A mythic logic is an internal logic here of Jyotish, a mythic, psycho-mythic logic that guides the psyche in its earthly experience. These are primordial tales which you'll see repeat themselves. Right? That's why we see like certain ways that are common in cross-culturally, that are common in the human experience. One would think that, oh, this culture is so different, so the people would express, the family dynamics would be different. There will be, on surface level, there will be many differences. And that's what, there's a lot of emphasis in psychotherapy that the culture that you come from is sort of unique to that person. And to be able to relate to the person, you need to be from that culture. But Jyotish sort of gives us an insight that takes us beyond those bounds, gives us an access to the psyche which is cross culturally true, which says true across time, across hundreds of years, through eras. It's so powerful. To practice Jyotish is not merely to analyze charts. Before we hear a psycho-mythic, a mythic logic that guides the psyche in its earthly experience. Jyotish that we know is the psycho-metaphysics of how we experience things on this particular planet itself. To practice Jyotish is not merely to analyze charts, it is to witness the dance of the divine. That's a little sort of reorientation for us, for astrologers, students of astrology, especially of Jyotish. To read the psyche as myth, a psychomyth, to track the movements of archetypal time, and to attune oneself to the structures of redemption embedded in the grahas themselves. Each planetary motion, each graha motion is a timeless gesture of the torment of Brahman and the encoded possibility of freedom from the dream. So first you're seeing how Janardhan, how we are getting going through the agitation because of certain karmic material that we sort of carry, and how the primordial karmic material probably would have come about. And through the agitation, through the torment of samsara in Brahman, in our earthly experience, which is this is what's relevant, this is our Brahman. Here, we don't know, uh, we're not we don't want to even go to other galaxies and imagine stuff from there. For Earth, this is a real psychological felt experience. And the encoded possibility within itself. The fact that you are being tormented, or the fact that there is agitation of pleasure, of pain, of all kinds of experiencing, naturally implies that there is a possibility of silencing this agitation, going into a state where you can get freedom from the dream of the cosmic egg, Brahma Anda, the cosmic dream of Brahma, of Brahma. So it's so profound. Sketor mean avatarascha is what we're focusing on, and here we've sort of built a psychomethic mythic sort of understanding. So we now move to the next bit, which is in essence, the psycho-mythic framework refers to the recognition that myth is the language of the unconscious. Each avatar, such as Matsya, Varaha, Narsimha, Varaha is of Rahu, Matsya is of Ketu, Narsimha is of Mars, is not merely a narrative or just a deity, but a psychic operation. This is what Jyotish is proposing. This is what I'm proposing. An ontological event occurring within the psyche, again and again across time. Jyotish, when rightly approached, is the mapping of these operations in time. Jyotish gives us the map of how these operations unfold in time. This is not in the predictive sense of what will happen, but in the revelatory sense of what is happening itself. It's an ongoing experience of a myth, beneath the surface of the individual, within the collective field, and above, reflected in the celestial mirror. So in the celestial mirror, how the subtle psycho-metaphysical mirror of how this descends into our earthly individual collective experience here. This is where Jyotish reveals its psychoanalytic power. By tracking the movement of the grahas, not merely as physical or mythic objects, but as archetypal forces, agents of karma and vehicles of unconscious content. And that's what it says. Karma falado. Karma, what prarabdha, unconscious genetic, psychogenetic material that we are carrying. Karma falado, the unfolding of that material as a vehicle of unconscious content is the grahas, is and Jyotish is the structure and dynamics, how that interact and manifests. So when we study the psychomythic implications of an avatar's connection to a graha, two things occur. We gain new interpretive insights into the nature of the graha itself, its texture, its function, its its mythopoetic scope. So we learn about the graha itself. So when we'll study mean avatar, Matsya Avatar of Ketu, we'll get to learn a lot about Ketu's workings itself, its function, its texture, its mythopoetic scope. And the second thing that happens is we develop a diagnostic and therapeutic lens. So this can be very useful in psychoanalytic psychotherapeutic work itself. A way to recognize how these themes manifest in a person's life, how Graha may be enacting an unresolved story, a submerged tension, a distorted calling. Right? And this really adds a whole new richness, especially if someone is interested in Jungian analysis, Carl Gustav Jung's analytic psychology. This is such a rich sort of landscape. We are so abundant in this when it comes to Jyotish and all the literature that we have in India, Sanskrit literature. It's such a rich landscape. It's mind blowing the number of connections there are. Even how we saw in the previous sutra, where Mercury is told as the son of the moon, Narsimha is told as Simika is being invoked as the son of Simika, the born of Simika. There's so many relations, and then when you go into the literature there and then you ground your understanding of Jyotish through a birth chart and go into an interpretive framework, it's such a rich landscape. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So to work psychoanalytically with Jyotish is to see the avatar at play within the birth chart, to ask what myth is seeking expression here, what graha is bearing the weight of this psychic narrative, which is the dominant sort of narrative, or there can be complex interactions of two or three narratives which play out in a very interesting sort of story. And how do we assist in its integration, which is the main part? Like, how do we assist in sort of uh, making this unconscious content conscious, accepted, and even engaged consciously with as part and parcel of one's unfolding, one's product stuff, the karmic stuff that we carry in, or engage with it consciously through Purusharth. So there's a whole philosophy there. For instance, when we say Rama, let's take an example here. Emerges from the sun. We are not simply making a devotional claim. It's not about bhakti, which it could be, which is also beautiful, has its own psychotherapeutic effect. We are recognizing that the sun's function as will, direction, clarity, and sovereign attention of this free sort of self-contained attention is psychomythically expressed through the figure of Rama. So when we study Ram, we understand something about sun. The righteous one, the exiled king, all these archetypal themes come forth. The unwavering dharmic agent. So when the sun is challenged in a chart, we are often witnessing a Rama complex in the individual, a split between duty and desire, a struggle to inhabit the self as king. So profound, right? We are seeing a Rama complex in the individual who's having an affliction with the sun. If you see someone with Sun Rahu and they are becoming a leader in the world and they become a president of a certain country, you'll see them expressing the things that Sun wants to as Ram, but in a way that is not grounded in the right way, which is not taking a person into, it is distorting it through the Rahu influence towards Sun. So we can understand and go into an interpretation through that. So reading about all of these texts, ancient texts that refer to all of these avatars is super, super, super important for a student of Jyotish. Likewise, when we say Krishna emerges from the moon, right? We see the moon's function as reflection, adaptability, emotional attunement, which is all lunar functions made manifest in the figure of Krishna, the playful trickster, the master of rasa, Leela, the one who charms, consoles, and orchestrates Leela, the king maker, the one who can take someone and make them a king, the subtle guide, the subtle inner voice that came to Arjuna. When the moon is afflicted, it may speak to a distortion of the Krishna function, a dissociation from intimacy, connection, a manipulation of connection, or an inability to nurture things with sincerity. Isn't that mind blowing? I mean, for me, it is. As a student of Jyotish, this bit of Jyotish has always blown my mind, and how much rich of a landscape that we have through Jyotish that is totally inaccessible to most of us. And yeah, so I find this really fascinating. So if Rama and Krishna offer us the archetypes of conscious sovereignty and relational mastery, conscious sovereignty of Rama and relational mastery of Krishna, Matsya and Varaha plunge us into the deep waters of the unconscious and the thick mud of incarnation. They are not polished or palatable, they are threshold figures, initiators into the liminal, dissolving boundaries and demanding descent. By contemplating Matsya and Varaha, we encounter the Graha's most misunderstood and least human, Ketu and Rahu, and in doing so we begin to track the evolutionary force of rupture, shadow, and karmic confrontation that they bring. And they do that when you go into Jyotish properly. It is actually like that. So let us now enter these stories, not to interpret them as mere allegory, but to listen to their call, to listen to the psycho-mythic function, the layer, the deeper layer, and how it unfolds in the consciousness, to see how they shape experience, and to recognize where in our lives these avatars may already be swimming or digging through the mind. So let's get into this. So we look at this text. I wanted to get into where do we start? Where does this story, the tale of Meen Avatar of Matsya Avatar, starts to unfold? So one of the earliest surviving references to the Being Avatar to Matsya Avatar is found in Shat Shat, which means 100, Path paths, 100 path Brahman. Brahman are these texts of the of it's one of the most important actually texts, and this has one of the most important Upanishads, which is Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is I think the final portion of this Brahman. So these are like many verses, and it has many Upanishads, many texts, and it's a huge like study in and of itself. So the earliest surviving mention of Matsya tale, legend of Matsya, is found not in the Purana, but in Shatpat Praman, a prose text associated with Shukla Yajurved. This account is sparse, direct, yet symbolically loaded. It does not name Vishnu nor speak of the avatars, but it plants the seed, a mythic gesture towards preservation, transformation, and the cosmic flood. The idea of this great deluge, this great flood, gets spoken of in Shatpat Brahman, and in reference to that, Ketu's Mean Avatar. Meena is evoked, not as an avatar, not nothing is spoken of about Vishnu and stuff. Whether this text came first or another text came first, we don't know. There are different speculations on the writing style of the Sanskrit language, of carbon dating of the scriptures itself, and different kinds of cross referencing different texts and different sutras. But ultimately, we don't know. Now, whether Parashara's reference was earlier than this, whether Vishnu, because Vishnu is referred to in a more earlier, even more ancient texts than Shatpat Brahman. So, what came when is sort of something that is still being unraveled. A lot of the literature that we have, scholarship, is Eurocentric, is European literature, and it's distorted. The translations are distorted, there's no doubt, and the dating is distorted. So we're trying to redate, revise all of these things that have been taken away and sort of distorted for us. So I just wanted to place this Shatpan Brahman here for you to see, and what the sutras is. You can read through this, pause here, read through this, and go through it. But here's a translation of it. It says, early one morning, water was brought to Manu for his ablutions, just as we bring water with our hands for cleansing. In that water, in his cupped hands, a fish appeared. The fish spoke to him, "Protect me, I will save you." Manu asked, "From what will you save me?" The fish replied, "A great flood will sweep away all beings. I will carry you through it." Manu inquired, "How will I take care of you?" The fish said, "As long as I am small, many will threaten me, because fish eat fish. Keep me first in a small jar. When I outgrow it, move me to a ditch. When I outgrow that, place me in a pond. And when even that is too small, take me to the ocean. There I will be beyond all danger." And so it was. The fish grew constantly ever larger. Eventually the fish said, "Soon in 1 year the flood will come. Prepare a boat and wait for me. When the flood rises, enter the boat, and I shall appear. Tie the boat to my horn, and I will guide you to safety." This, if you are into psychoanalysis, symbolism, and psychotherapeutic work, there's so much to unpack here. So much to unpack, especially if you're familiar with internal logic of Jyotish, with how these grahas function. It's absolutely mind blowing. Now, here's the tale that we'll be using, and this is a very common tale, Legend of Matsya. Whether Shatpat Praman tale was earlier version or whether this was the earlier version, we don't know. That's one of the versions that are considered to be the earliest exposition on Meen Avatar. This is also one that is commonly found in various Itihasa texts, Puranas, and different texts. So this one, let's do a reading of this one. This is a more fun sort of story. Long ago, in an age where the sacred rhythm of time still beat undisturbed, there lived a king named Satyavrata. True to his name, Satyavrata vowed to truth. He was a man of unwavering discipline, devoted to the path of dharma. His days were spent in deep meditation and sacred ritual, performing his morning oblations at the bank of river Kritamal. One morning, as he cupped his hand to lift the river's water for a libation, he noticed something unusual. A tiny fish, shimmering in the sunlight, flickered in the hollow of his hand or his palms. Startled, he was about to let it go, but then the fish spoke. "O noble king," it said, "I am small, and the waters are vast. In these depths, the great devour the weak. Big fish eat small fish. If you let me go, I will be swallowed. Protect me, and I shall one day protect you." Intrigued and moved by the fish's plea, Satyavrat placed it gently in a small jar. But the next morning the fish had grown, outgrowing one vessel after another: jar, pot, tank, and finally even the palace lake. Satyavrat understood that this was no ordinary being. He carried the fish to the ocean itself. Yet even there the fish warned, "This is not safe. Larger forces dwell here. I am not ready." Now convinced of the fish's divinity, Satyavrata bowed and asked, "Who are you, O mysterious one? Why have you come to me in this form?" The fish revealed itself. It was Vishnu. Vishnu simply means all-pervading, that which is within everything. That's all that Vishnu means. The literal translation of the word, Sanskrit word Vishnu, is mean that which is in everything. And that's the whole effort of all Vishnu discourses, all Vaishnava discourses, especially Vishnu Sahasranam, which is 1008 names of Vishnu. It's just everything. The whole idea is that everything is that all pervading principle of consciousness, Lord of time, and the one who sustains the rhythm of creation and dissolution. He had taken the form of Matsya, the primordial fish, to warn of an impending deluge, a flood that would dissolve all forms, washing away the structures of previous age. In 7 days, the fish said, "The world will drown. Build a boat. Gather with it the seeds of all life and the seven rishis, the seers of the inner and outer realms, the one who can see. When the water rises, I shall return. You will see me again, and you will know what to do." True to the prophecy, the rains came, ocean surged, and three worlds were submerged. Satyavrata's boat, guided by intuition and resolve, found its way to the surface. There, Matsya returned, and now colossal, radiant, and horned. The king fastened the boat to Matsya's horn using Nagashesha, the cosmic serpent. With calm amidst the cosmic storm, and the fish navigated the boat across the swirling waters of dissolution. During the journey, Matsya imparted sacred wisdom to Satyavrata and the sages, knowledge that would seed the next cycle of creation. Some version of the tale say that the demon Hayagriva had stolen the Vedas, the knowledge, the primordial knowledge of existence, and hidden them in the depths. Matsya descended, battled the Asura, and rescued the Vedas, ensuring that the blueprint for life would not be lost in the dissolution. In the stillness that followed the storm, when the waters began to recede and creation stirred again, Satyavrata emerged transformed. He had become Vaivasvat Manu, the progenitor of the current human cycle, the seed of our age. There is so much symbolism in that tale. The role, the Vaivasvata Manu, the seed, the idea of seed of knowledge, all these ideas, and we are always keep in mind while reading through this about ideas about Ketu. So we'll dissect this now. Before we now, before us now is not just a tale to admire, but a living psychological map, a series of initiatory images. Everything is evoking an image, an idea, a symbol that describe what happens when the Ketu function becomes active in one's life. What begins as a whisper, a small fish cupped in the palms, becomes a cataclysm, a dissolution of the world's self and structure. Each element of the story reveals a dimension of Ketu's working, its call to disidentify, its confrontation with chaos, and its transmission of the primordial seed. This is no linear transformation, but a cyclical dissolution, no ascent without descent, no knowledge without loss. What follows is a symbolic and psychoanalytic reading of the Matsya Ketu myth. In 10 stages, we're going to study 10 different ways this could be read. Each moment in the story reflects a psychic threshold we all cross, consciously or unconsciously, when the grahas of moksha, mystery, and memory begin to the invisible work within us. So it is an unconscious force, it is an invisible force as we've been discussing in the previous lectures, and it is a mysterious sort of force that always escapes our understanding, as we understood in Dhumrakara and Vanaspatho and all those sutras that we just, Vanastho, all the sutras that we've done. So isn't this so far so profound? Isn't this so mind-blowing? It is to me. I don't know if it is to you. Symbols, motifs, and the psychoanalytic reading of Matsya. So first we see Satyavrat, the vow of truth. The story begins with Satyavrat, literally one who has taken a vow of truth. This is not incidental. Ketu, as the graha of spiritual radicality, does not operate in just any psyche. It emerges in one who is already oriented towards the real, the sattvic seeker who has been following inner discipline, meditation, prayer, and sacrifice, often for lifetimes. Satyavrata is the precondition for the Ketu function to activate in its liberatory or transcendent mode. So that's one sort of idea that Ketu leads to this final dissolution of this cycle of creation. But the to Ketu in its real form of its proper function comes to the one who is honest to themselves. It is true for both Rahu and Ketu. Honesty and self reflection in the right way reveals a lot of unconscious stuff that we've been going through and really makes us confront with all the things that are not integrated, that we've rejected in others and ourselves, which creates distortion, confusion in how to live our life, how to perceive life, and how to have a healthy relationship with life itself. Truthfulness, sincerity, and devotion becomes a very important factor for Ketu to be understood clearly. Ketu becomes chaotic, dissociated, or delusional. With them, it becomes the boat that crosses the ocean of samsara. Right? So, without truthfulness, sincerity, and devotion, if we are not going into a state that is sincere and honest, self reflective, and doing the right kind of work with oneself, you'll see a lot of chaos, dissociation, and delusion in Ketu phases. With them, it becomes a boat that crosses the. With them, if you have the right kind of attitudes, right kind of virtues, it actually becomes a sort of a safe zone, an understanding zone, and you come to a certain kind of clarity. Whether this makes you enlightened or not is not the idea here. The idea is that grahas are fundamentally seen as agitators of pure consciousness, bringing experience into the forefront. How we relate to what degree of consciousness we relate to that graha, which is our sun and the moon, Atman and Manas, especially the Atman, would sort of take the same graha and make the expression of that same energy on a higher sort of level, a higher octave. The second thing that appears is a tiny fish, the first glimmer of unconsciousness. So the first time Ketu sort of appears to a truthful seeker, to Satyavrata. Matsya appears first as a tiny fish, barely perceptible, almost dismissible. This is the way the numinous unconscious often first appears in our life as a fragile image, a flicker of intuition, a small voice. If it is not tended to with compassion and attunement, compassion, why? Because a lot of the times the content is makes our conscious self uncomfortable, and we have to meet the content with a lot of understanding. It's okay to feel that way. It's okay to have this sort of weird rage that is coming from somewhere, maybe. It is easily swallowed by the forces of collective unconsciousness, by the big fish. So the big fish is these all the other psychical forces, the bigger conscious egoic self, or the other grahas, which will sort of like drown out that unconscious voice in us. This small fish symbolizes the initial emergence of Ketu's message in the psyche, subtle, silent, and requiring care. It is a seed of gnosis, the whisper of the absolute breaking into the field of karma. Ketu is a whisper of the absolute entering, breaking into the field of karma. It is really profound, and it is quite an. It feels like a very far-fetched idea, but it's really practically plays out. In fact, one of my teachers says that wherever Ketu is placed is where God enters into you, where you become open to the idea of uh, a state of being which is beyond the body and the mind. Matsya Nyaya, the law of the jungle. So you see in both the stories in Shatpat Praman story, also in the tale that we discussed, which is from the Puranas and different texts, Srimad Bhagavatam and all the different texts have these references, come from the law of the jungle. Big fish eat the small fish, which is called Matsya Nyaya. The fish says small fish are eaten by large fish. This is a law of predation, known in Indian philosophy as Matsya Nyaya, a brutal Darwinian principle of survival. Ketu stands outside this logic. Ketu, like Satyavrata, refuses the law of domination and instead acts from karuna, from compassion. This refusal is what sets the stage for spiritual awakening. And spiritual awakening can just be awakening to subtle ideas about your psyche, about your emotion. Anything that is subtler than your current mode of being feels like spiritual. Spiritual awakening does not mean the realization of the soul. For that, only yoga, dhyana, dharana, samadhi is appropriate. Spiritual awakening here is becoming conscious of the importance of your body, emotional, being kind, becoming a better human being is how I personally relate to this idea of spiritual awakening. In psychological terms, Ketu arises when one no longer wants to play the game of power, prestige, or egoic survival. It seeks exit, not victory. So Ketu really allows a graha, wherever it's placed and whatever it's placed, to sort of create a sense of to sort of numb or sort of detach from that graha. It really doesn't want to play the game that everyone is playing, this ambitious game. It is not an ambitious graha. And that's what we see in the attitude of the fish. The way the fish has appeared, the way the fish is sort of proving its self, and the kinds of things that is asking off of Satyavrat is all sort of telling us something about Ketu's expression. So here we saw first the precondition to be able to understand Ketu properly, which is being truthful, sincere, honest. The second thing we see, it appears as a silent small fish. It just appears as this small tiny fish that you do hear. It's not this loud screaming voice, which is the other grahas probably. Then we see, which is more Rahu would be more such a loud screaming sort of sound. Rahu's more out there, Ketu's more in there. Matsya Nyaya, then the idea of bigger fish will eat small fish, and the call for compassion, the call for attunement and understanding. So these are the few ways to read this, and there'll be probably so many other ways to read this. So don't get stuck in the way that I'm reading it. Read it for yourself as well. Write down the sutra, take that down, and try to unravel the symbolic depth of this to understand Ketu through that. Then we see the constant growth of the fish, the expanding unconscious. No container can hold Matsya, even pot, vessel, and the pond is outgrown. This is a powerful metaphor for Ketu's dissatisfaction with worldly structures, and it truly really creates a sense of dissatisfaction in a strong Ketu influence. No identity, relationship, career, philosophy can contain what Ketu is pointing towards. So imagine if one could understand that they're going through a Ketu sort of Matsya process in their journey and be able to integrate that function. Be still be able to perform the role, identify with the role, have the right relationships to whatever degree possible, follow the career path, go through that. Why? Because now there's an understanding that they're going through the Matsya phase. It doesn't create sort of a cataclysmic chaos in the psyche, right? Because it feels more ordered and it doesn't feel like an endless process. It feels like a process that one goes through and then one comes out f- from the other side. This also represents the psychoanalytic pressure of the unconscious, the patient who can no longer fit into their old roles, whose inner material threatens to flood their surface life. This is the flood before the flood, the prelude to transformation. This is where Ketu's maturation age has been told to be 48 years. This is when midlife crisis happens for most people. This is when the unconscious material comes forth full blast, or like stuff that has been uh, being dealt with because of social cultural condition and different ideas cannot be held together by the psyche, and one is like sort of enough. I cannot do this anymore, and sort of a process of transformation starts for the person. They start letting go of their structures of the first 40, 45 years of their life. So the next one is the ocean and the voice of the divine, the subtle voice. Even the ocean is not safe. This is a crucial turning point. Formless consciousness cannot rest even in the boundless field of relative existence, of Maya, relativity. Satyavrata finally surrenders and the fish reveals its true nature. This is the moment, and Satyavrata is a king, right? So it is someone of a lot of solar sort of expression, sun expression, of someone who is noble, honest, truthful, of Rama sort of idea. So one needs to be a little bit of a Satyavrata, of a certain kind of Rama, to whatever degree possible, to have the fish reveal its true nature. This is the moment when becomes revelatory, when the individual no longer seeks to fix or manage their life, but surrenders to the mystery. The surrender is not passive, it is a sacred act of seeing through, of seeing the thing through also, but seeing through the subtleties. So now the ocean itself is symbolic. That then comes the deluge, pralaya, as inner dissolution. The coming flood is pralaya, the great dissolution. In Jungian terms, if you do a Jungian reading of this is the collapse of ego structures, of known structures, of this is who I am. And you turn 45, 48, 50, whatever, your strong Ketu influence, like, oh, this is not who I am actually. I thought this is who I was, but now the unconscious material that is coming forth and distorting my entire perception of reality is what sort of trying to get integrated into my conscious self and bringing a whole new way of being in life. In yogic terms, it is the withdrawal of prana from all objects of desire, pratyahara. In therapeutic terms, it is the crisis of identity that precedes real transformation. This is Ketu at full power, not as a loss but as sacred unmaking, unmasking, the death of the false self, the washing away of borrowed identities, the socio-cultural identities that we borrow through expectations, through parental influence, through how we were raised in school, or the cultural stuff, or nationality, things like that. All of that starts to sort of mature into it. There can be many ways this manifests. Sometimes Ketu is anchored into too many grahas, and certain things are fixated upon, and there's unfinished business that needs to be taken care of, which is the karmic inertia of Ketu that needs to fulfill itself before a larger cycle of dissolution can take place. A proper dissolution can take place. So again, we saw these profound three more themes. Now we'll see four final themes, and these are not final in any sense, that you also must contemplate these and read into all the symbols that I'm probably missing out on, which I am sure and I want to miss out on them and want you to sort of interact with that material. Then we see the boat, symbol of the subtle body and the yogic path. So this is another reading that we can do. Matsya tells Satyavrata to build a boat, prepare a vessel, prepare the human body, prepare the subtle body. This is a symbolic preparation, the construction of a subtle inner vehicle through sadhana, through philosophical clarity, intellectual clarity, emotional clarity, ethical strength, inner purification, whatever you want it to be, the boat will become the boat. Whether you're not on the yogic path, you're on some mundane, normal, material path, even then there will be some sort of boat that has to be built before that transformation can happen so that Matsya can see you through the dissolution. The boat is also the witnessing self, the part of us that can ride the storm rather than drown in it. Boat can be seen as the Atman, the sun, Sarva Atma Chidivanath. Ketu gives no protection to those who are unprepared, but to the prepared mind. Ketu gives access to freedom. Liberation, not as final liberation that you go to some sort of a-causal realm, timeless realm, but liberation from whatever condition we are stuck in our current life. So there's a very practical reading to this. It's not these abstract metaphysical ideas. These are psycho-metaphysical, psycho-mythic, grounded in the practical realities of life itself. Then we see Nagashesha, the serpent of memory and imprint. The boat is tied to Matsya's horn using the serpent. Naga Shesha, which is one of the most important serpents, one of the most important Nagas, the coiled remainder of creation. This is symbolic of the vasanas, the samskaras, the deep imprints that must be carried across cycles. Shesha is memory, both karmic and cosmic. The desire, serpent is also serpent of desire, the longings that are still remain within us. Ketu does not erase the past, it carries its essence distilled through the waters of forgetting, through the waters of dissolution, of this great deluge, the great flood. A serpent, sort of this genetic DNA subtle imprint, will be carried forward for the next cycle of creation, for the next birth to begin. Rescuing the Vedas. Ketu is the keeper of primordial knowledge. In several versions, Matsya dives into the abyss to recover the stolen Vedas from a demon called Hayagriva. And Hayagriva has a lot of references in Indic literature. That in and of itself is another very interesting connection that has to do a lot of you do a lot of psychoanalytic reading there. This is Ketu's most sacred function, to rescue Gnosis from the flood of forgetfulness. Ketu is not just negation, it is the keeper of the seed, the carrier of what must be preserved for the next cycle of creation to continue, for your next birth to continue. The flood destroys, but Ketu remembers. So, this is another very interesting point which tells us about Ketu. Then we see Vayavasvat Manu. It's a very important idea from seeker to archetype. After the storms, Satyavrata becomes Vaivasvat Manu. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The progenitor of this human cycle. He is now the lawgiver, no longer a seeker, but one who establishes the dharma for future generations. Right? Dharma means the law, right? The next cycle needs a certain way that the metaphysics has to unfold, and that would be given by the Vaivasvat Manu. This is the integration of Ketu, when the one who has journeyed through the dissolution emerges as a wise lawgiver, a true spiritual authority, not as a prophet of certainty, but as a custodian of what must now be remembered for the next cycle to unfold with its own sort of ways itself. But a certain starting, beginning point, that certain gnosis, certain knowledge is required for the next cycle to even have sort of a dream to begin again. So this is 10 sort of ideas that can be sort of derived from that legend of Matsya, but there are many, many ways this can also be seen. One of the things that I wanted to touch upon was Manu, Vaivasvat Manu, Manas and the moon. We know Manas from Mana Kumud Bandavaha. The friend of the lotus moon is Manas. To further deepen our understanding of the psycho-mythic tale, we must pause and contemplate the main nature of the figure at the heart of the flood, Manu. The Sanskrit root of Manu is Man, the same as Manas, which is the mind. Mind is one of the uh, working translations. It helps us understand Manas in some sort of practical ways, though that's not the exact translation. This is not a linguistic accident, but a profound metaphysical clue. This connection between man, human, Manu, Manas, and the moon, the mind, is all sort of one sort of encoded into each other. It's so profound. This is not linguistic accident, but a profound metaphysical clue. In the Indic thought, to be human is to be manasic, to possess a reflective mind, to dream and desire, to suffer, to remember, to be shaped by impressions, samskaras, and yet to reach towards something more. What is that more? Sun, Atman, Atamanas, Atimanas. That's how I see it. It's probably wrong. It's like beyond Manas. Manu is not simply the first man. He is the archetype of the human mind. It is the archetype of the human mind, susceptible to confusion, gripped by survival, but capable of radical transformation through intervention from the beyond. In the flood myth, that intervention is Matsya, the fish who speaks. In Jyotish, the moon governs Manas. It reflects the light of the sun as the mind reflects the self. But this reflection is unstable, distorted by memory, longing, fear, and trauma. The moon gathers impressions and responds with emotion, and when overwhelmed, the mind collapses beneath the weight of its own contents. This is deluge, the crisis of identity. All the stuff that the moon carries and the entire birth chart represents, we ultimately live through that content, use the psychostructure, create a certain. We live unconsciously. We think we want this. This is the right thing to have. We have it. We say, okay, I want to marry this person. This would be the right thing. This will bring me happiness. We marry that sort of pattern, and it doesn't uh, prove to be true, and we collapse under the content of our own unconsciousness, go through the process of dissolution and come out from the other side, and then we start seeking something more than manas, which is the atman. And then comes Matsya, the whisper from the order of being, subtle, easy to dismiss, yet persistent. This is Ketu, the graha not of new light but of ancient echoes. Ketu does not pull us towards the purified essence, it preserves what must not be forgotten, the karmic remnants, the seed of previous cycle of consciousness. It is not transcendent clarity but transpersonal residue. So we have to understand that human beings are fundamentally manasic, lunar beings. We have to become solar beings. We have the spark within us to become solar, atmic, sun based beings. We use Manas's capacity to do that. Ketu is the imprints that we carry which cause us to be a certain way unconsciously and make certain choices. We make those choices unconsciously, then we sort of fall within because of that. Cause because it's unconscious material of the past, we break. Because we break, then we go to the next cycle, which uses again the unconscious material that is now left within us, and usually ideally should take us to a higher octave than a lower one. And that's where Rahu's ideas enter, how we sort of engage our Rahu in our life, how we evolve into that which freaks us out, that which we fear, and move past that and sort of ascend in consciousness. This can also, these dissolutions, these great deluge can also cause descents. Ultimately, we all ascend. That's the theory, the philosophy of soteriology of Indic traditions, is that ultimately everyone will realize some sort of higher state. So this is a very interesting connection between Manu, Manas, and the moon. And Vaivasvat Manu and Satyavrat turning into Manu, into the imprint for the next cycle of creation, is a very interesting sort of symbol. And there are many ways to read. This is one of the ways that I've read this, and you could, if you find some interesting ideas that come up while you are listening to this particular lecture, just comment and have a discussion. Try to have a dialogue about these things and see where it takes us. So to heat Ketu is to build an arc, not to escape, but of containment. It sort of it contains the psychological structure. The arc is the subtle body, the fruit of yogic effort, trust, and discipline. The seven sages aboard are our higher faculties: buddhi, discernment, smriti, memory, dhriti, stability, shraddha, deep inner faith, so on and so forth. The serpent that binds the ark to Matsya's horn is Shesha, the remainder the karmic trail, the memory thread that survives the dissolution. Even the Vedas that Matsya fights Hayagriva, the demon, who wants to not allow for the next sort of cycle to emerge, maybe, is fought, and Matsya sort of protects Veda, which is the primordial knowledge for the or the vid, from the root vid, that which can be known. To a final ascent onto the mountain top is not liberation; it is survival through dismemberment. What remains is not freedom from the cycle. This is very important about Ketu because it is seen as moksha karaka, because it can instigate a psychological process of dissatisfaction which can maybe cause someone to start seeking something beyond. But a lot of the times it is not the case, which we see how many of us are seeking spiritual ideas and liberation of some sort. Not many of us. If you see, probably 1 in 10 people, or 2 in 10 people, 1 in 5 people want that. This is Ketu's most paradoxical gesture. It rescues the structure, not to destroy it, but to carry it forward. It preserves the dissolution, the delusion. This is why Rahu and Ketu are the points of entanglement, astronomical entanglement of the Surya, Sun, Chandra, Manas, Moon, and Earth. That's why the entangle us. Ketu is preserving not to free oneself so that the next cycle of creation can continue. Not out of malice, but because the karmic pattern has not been exhausted. It is that which has remained. We don't see Ketu as something that is not allowing us to liberate. Why is Ketu preserving all this knowledge from previous cycle? Because the knowledge, the ideas, the thoughts, the feelings, the need for Satyavrata to survive its Satyavrata-ness still exists. So Ketu is using Satyavrata for it to become the next Vaivasvat. If Satyavrata didn't even want to remain Satyavrata anymore and started meditating in the face of a dissolution, it would have probably been liberated from this whole ordeal. But Satyavrata wanted to remain Satyavrata, and then it went through the sort of the cycle and became the lawgiver of Manu. So Ketu is liberating in the sense that it can instill a sense of feeling that leads to that kind of seeking. But in and of itself, it is keeping one very much fixated and locked in. And you'll see wherever Ketu is, the person really fixates on that Rashi, that Bhava, or those grahas that Ketu is conjunct. So thus we must recognize Manu is Manas, the reflective, impressionable mind. The flood is the psychological overwhelm, the collapse of identity under the weight of its own stories. Matsya is the signal of Ketu, preserving something vital but not liberating. The mountain is not the self, but the site where a new cycle begins, where the memory of last one survives. This is where Vavasvat Manu sort of finds rest, refuge. Ketu's psychic function in the birth chart is not to transcend, but to remind, not to liberate, but to carry forward that must be seen again. It may begin as a dissatisfaction, fragmentation, or mystic intuition, but its end is not necessarily moksha. It is the preservation of karmic seed, so the soul may once again try to resolve that which has not been metabolized. So all, even the last final strand of mental impression, subtlest of the subtle impression in the Manomaya Kosh or any of the other koshas, any of the subtle bodies, all the way up to like Anandmaya Kosh, every particular imprint has to be dissolved. Only then the next cycle doesn't emerge. Otherwise, something will restart again. And a lot of ancient tales are like this, where a person was on the verge of liberating, but a thought came and the person became a deer. There are all these. That's what they're trying to indicate. That's all these psychomythic tales. They are referring to the same principles, metaphysical principles that they're trying to express the subtle. But it's so hard to grasp the subtle that they're encoded in these sort of legends, these tales. That's at least my take on it. Maybe you see this more literally and you see it as a literal event that happened as an actual physical fish that did it, maybe, but that's how I read it. It's a principle centered approach. So, the archetypal function of Ketu, while Ketu is often spoken of in an astrological discourse as the graha of moksha, of liberation, detachment, and spiritual transcendence, which might be the case, I'm not sure. This view, though not incorrect, is partial. When we examine Ketu through the psychomythic lens, particularly in its association with the Matsya Avatāra, a more nuanced and unsettling picture can even emerge. In the tale of Matsya, Vishnu as a horned fish rescues the Vedas, the seed of life, through the great deluge Pralaya. He instructs Manu to gather the sages, Vavasvat Manu, no, it was Satyavrata at that time, and essentially the species construct a boat and guide them across the turbulent ocean of destruction. At first glance, this appears to be a salvific act, a soteriological act, a myth of divine protection. But on the deeper reflection, maybe we recognize that what is being perceived is not freedom from the cycle, but the continuity of the cycle itself. This is what we just discussed also. Ketu's role is not one of final emancipation from samsara, though it can create feelings of dissatisfaction and distrust. The precise preservation of its distilled essence. It does not liberate from illusion, it safeguards its archetypal blueprint even. The deluge dissolves the manifest form, but Ketu, like Matsya, carries forward the DNA of karma. It transports the latent structures of experience the way does the sages the seeds, not to annihilate them, but to reinstantiate them into a new cycle. Isn't that mind blowing? And that's why we see Rahu and Ketu both are told to be Dhumrakara, both are told to be Bhayankara. Even in this tale, Satyavrata was of a balanced mind, but it's quite a Bhayankar tale. Imagine there's a great deluge. You're being told by a fish that there's going to be a in 1 year, everything that you know is going to be underwater. Everything that you know will be destroyed completely. All your thing is an illusion. So it's told as Dhumrakaro Vanasthopi Bhayankaraha, right? And then that's the ideas, and we have to connect the dots. We have to connect the sutras, and the sutras sort of takes us to deeper sort of understanding of the nodes. From a depth psychological perspective, this maps closely to the function of dissociation with preservation. In trauma, the psyche does not always integrate and transcend its wound. Rather, it sequesters its essence into a fragment, a trace, a symbol, something small but enduring, which survives the collapse of the egoic world. So one might even overcome trauma and have a new ego identity formation, but the trauma structures are still somewhere there in the unconscious. This trace then resurfaces in later constellations, seeking new vessels for expression. Even that's why the work is to not to grow one's life that the size of the trauma becomes small. It's not that you don't grieve it still, it's that the size of the grief becomes smaller in the face of all the things that we sort of create, regardless of it, through support, through care, through understanding, through compassion. Ketu functions similarly. It is a cosmic archivist. It archives these things. And by cosmic, we say earthly through the imprints that we have. Not the destroyer of illusion, but the one who ensures its continuity in subtler, more refined forms, even. Its so called spirituality is not freedom in the Vedantic sense, but a post cathartic stillness, the residual flame in the ashes, unconscious core of the next becoming. To call Ketu moksha is thus a bit premature. Ketu is the echo of moksha, not moksha itself. Ketu can instigate moksha, how Jupiter can instigate jnana sukhado, the jnana, the gyan that gives us sukha, which can lead to some kind of freedom from a certain state. Similarly, Ketu can instigate that. Similarly, any graha can do that. Mars can do it in its own ways. Saturn can do it in its own ways. In fact, Saturn is a lot of times in a lot of interpretive frameworks is seen as that which gives you some sort of spiritual inclination, because suffering does that. Suffering of dukkha daha, right? That's what Saturn says. Chaya sunuscha dukkha daha. We see suffering sort of keeps us up, wakes us up. That's why Buddha starts with samsara dukkha, samsaram dukkham. That Saturn, the nature of entire samsara is like that of Saturn. So Saturn can also do it. Mars can also do it. Depends on what's the movement, what's the karmic path, what is it. So subtle. I probably don't even know why it is the way why the certain souls are moving upwards, some are moving downwards, and it's so complexity to it. So Ketu is the echo of moksha, not moksha itself. It carries the psychic potential for liberation, but more often it guards the karmic seed that will germinate again. So Ketu Saturn conjunction, Ketu Sun conjunctions, Ketu different Graha conjunctions oftentimes have like this thing with the Graha that the person has to enact out, get fixated on that Graha's things, get disappointed through that thing, and then finally let go of that Graha and allow for the new cycle to emerge. A lot of times it is not liberation, it's actually hyperfixation on the function of that graha. It carries a psychic potential for liberation, but more often it guards the karmic seed that will germinate again. In this way, we may say Ketu is the guardian of delusion, Dhumrakar, not to perpetuate suffering, but to ensure that the unfinished dream can often even begin again. It is not the exit door from the wheel of becoming, the wheel of samsara, this torment that we are going through, but the threshold between one cycle and the next, a liminal graha. Ketu is the edge of the dream, but not yet of the awakening. So isn't this just so much, tells us so much, just the reflecting on Matsya Avatar tells us, gives us so many clues about Ketu. So here's the final interpretation table, which will allow you to like sort of have like a recap of this rather long lecture. Dimension mythic archetype is Matsya Avatar, which is the fish who first appears as a whisper, then grows to cosmic proportions, guiding the seeker through dissolution, rescuing primordial knowledge, and anchoring the continuity of dharma across cycles. Psychoanalytic symbol, this rupture of the known. In psychoanalytic terms, rupture of the known comes through Ketu Rahu themes, especially Ketu. Rahu also though. But Ketu brings an inertia. It's like a feeling that I don't know where it's coming from a certain past. Rahu is more of a pull of the future. Ketu initiates the ego's unmaking and carries the memory of something deeper, not essence in the abstract, but the preserved residue of an earlier creation, an archetypal prior life that must be carried forward. Initiating condition appears in the psyche of Satyavrata, one already committed to truth. Ketu only awakens in a consciousness prepared for radical honesty, sacred disillusionment, positive uh, disillusionment, and transcendence through surrender, a restfulness that it's okay, it is the way it is. There's a lot of philosophy to what surrender is and stuff. Also, it's quite a complex idea. Primary function: preservation through dissolution. Ketu preserves not to liberate, but to carry forward the seed of previous creation, the unforgotten, the unassimilated, the unresolved. It holds memory, not finality. Mythic pattern: tiny fish, growth beyond containment, ocean of the unconscious, revelation, pralay, boat of yogic preparation, mountain of ascent, rebirth of dharma. This is a map of psychomythic individuation. So this the we sort of see first a tiny fish appears, it cannot be contained anymore. The ocean of unconscious turns into this thing. A revelation comes that you need to be the protector. The deluge happens. The yogic preparation of the boat has to happen. Then finally, Satyavrata turns into Vaivasvat Manu and gives rebirth of the new order, new rit, the new natural order. Metaphysics is given. Key symbols: tiny fish, numinous glimpse of the unconscious. So the tiny fish of Matsya is the numinous sort of tiny glimpse, a whisper of that there is some material within you, a way of being which you're not conscious of, but you show those traits in your personality, in your character, in your movement, in the way you're judging life and moving in life. Rahu-Ketu analysis can be very revealing. Matsya Nyaya, the predatory world of ego, of relativity, big fish, small fish. Deluge, collapse of ego and form, of the known. Boat, sadhana, subtle body, prepared witness. Shesha, karmic residue, Sheshanag. Vasanas, the enduring imprint. Seven sages, higher functions such as buddhi, discernment, spriti, satya, truth, stability, and stuff like that can be seen as seven sages. Mountain, which is the self, the stable ground being rediscovered through descent. It's a little overstretched here, but I also would want to use why the mountain of ascent is seen as Vaivasvatmanu's place, uh, which is the Mount Meru and stuff like that. Psycho-spiritual challenge: Ketu does not grant liberation, it prepares for it by undoing things in life. The danger lies in mistaking its pull as spiritual transcendence when it is actual atavistic memory, pulling us into forgotten karmic threads that require witnessing. Negative manifestation. It's a long lecture, so I'm like sort of my mouth is exhausted. Probably you're also exhausted. But there are this final part: negative manifestation, nihilism, escapism, bypassing, rootlessness, trance state, spiritual ego, or mystical inflation with no integration. Definitely, this is quite true. Positive manifestation, radical simplicity, clarity born of emptiness, witness consciousness, non-identification, intrinsic, instinctive knowledge of eternal, dharmic continuation of inner gnosis. Therapeutic task: help the individual, help yourself trace what is being remembered through Ketu, what psychic content is too large for the current conscious self, current vessel, what past knowledge or trauma is demanding symbolic rebirth. Ketu is the pressure of pre existing karma, not just its erasure. Psycho-metaphysical role: the graha of archetypal memory. This is not moksha itself, but the transpersonal gatekeeper of what must be preserved. Ketu is the graha of sacred continuity, carrying karmic code through dissolution to the next cycle of becoming. Ketu is not the self, but what remains after identity collapses. It marks the unresolved, often brilliant, often painful remnants of past lives. Karma too subtle or too ancient to name, but too significant to forget. It's very important, it's very interesting. Inner schema is Manu is Manas, flood, crisis of identity. Matsya, whisper of Ketu, appearing as edge of the conscious self. These are all the symbols. Boat is the yogic effort, intuition, subtle self. Mountain is the rediscovery of the self post collapse. Affirmation, core belief, is the most beautiful part where I would love to end this lecture. Probably you would also like this lecture to end by now. That which dissolves is not gone. That which remains is not yet known. Ketu keeps the ancient alive so the soul can return again. So we must sort of detangle ourselves from the Rahu-Ketu experience through conscious understanding, awareness, and compassion and courage. So I hope this rich sort of psycho-mythic framework of the unconscious, of the archetypal structure of the unconscious, through the understanding of the avatars, gives you some good basis to start thinking in, and sort of starts a dialogue between us about things that I'm probably understanding incorrectly, and I would love to be corrected, love to be sort of approached in sort of a sincere way as to like how I can also relook certain things. Maybe I'm missing certain details, maybe I'm misinterpreting certain things. We get into a discussion and see what how we can build Jyotish together. So thank you so much. And if you've stuck around up until this moment, and I will see you in the next lecture.